This is Beyond the Bell Tower, where an elite group of North Carolina State University students give us a behind-the-scenes look at their steps to success. These students, who are in the top 10% of the country, are active in student support services at NCSU. These students are low-income and first-generation college students. Nationally, this population has a 10% graduation rate. Here at NC State, these students have a graduation rate of over 90% and go on to become doctors, dentists, accountants, and engineers. They work at Google, Apple, and the NCAA. Some have even earned PhDs at Ivy League colleges. These students go well beyond the bell tower to attain their eminent goals.
So we are excited to have Kahila Phillips with us today.
That me.
Yes. How many more days do you have as a student at North Carolina State University?
I graduate in 5 more days.
Ooh. So do you remember your first 5 days on campus?
I do not too well. I did summer start before freshman year, so it's all a bit of a blur.
Mm-hmm. And then you started trio that first semester. Did you join in summer start?
No, so I was a Pac Promise Scholar originally, and then I saw Courtney at, I think it was the Last Dollar Scholarship. It was like some sort of reception happening, and she met me. She was just like, "Are you in trio?" I was like, "No." She was just like, "I'm going to get you a trio application." So I'm just like, okay. So I applied for it. I got in, so a good portion of my first semester, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then were you in ROTC then? Did you start out ROTC?
Yeah, I was kind of like, I guess, a walk-on for the program, but I started ROTC like the beginning of the semester, so I didn't have like a scholarship going into it or anything. I just sort of signed up for the class and went to the class.
And why would you want to do that? Sorry.
There was a time.
Yeah. Because I just know most people do it for the scholarship. But if you did JROTC in high school.
Yeah, so I tried to like get the scholarship while I was in high school, but some things didn't happen. Some wires got crossed or something like that. And then my attempt to walk on was so that I could get a scholarship. And I almost had it, but things didn't work out that way. So I had a plan. It just failed.
Well, don't they all? I think that's what they say. There's no plans that totally work out. So there's a couple of things that we definitely want to talk about, because your path beginning, let's start in the beginning, like your first semester at NC State and now your last semester of NC State are not completely, but very different.
Indeed, they are.
Yes. And so going back to that, like the plan, I'm pretty sure you had no idea what you're doing now was even a possibility.
Yeah, not at all. Was not even within the scope of what I had originally wanted to do.
So, can you tell us about what you're doing after NC State and how that all came about?
Yeah, so I will start off by saying, if people who know me know that I will graduate with a degree in accounting, it's something that I sort of had planned, once again, going back to that planning thing, since I was about 10. Like, there was 2 things I felt like I was going to do: get a degree and go into the Air Force. Not because I was like, yay, America, or anything like that. I just wanted someone to pay for my degree.
Yes, very smart.
So, and also I wanted to travel, and I felt like the Air Force would have given me the opportunity to do that. And
where are you from?
I'm from Rocky Mount, North Carolina, born and raised.
Oh. And you hadn't traveled a lot?
No, I mean, I've been to like different states, but never outside of the country before I got to NC State or anything like that. We don't have that kind of money, so. But yeah, I took some accounting classes when I was in high school, got A's in them, felt like, okay, I could do accounting, it's fine. Plus I knew that I can make a lot of money in it. Every business, whatever, nonprofit, government, all those things, like every profession needs an accountant. So I felt like if I were to be out of a job, I wouldn't be out of a job for too long. There was this overall like financial security piece to it.
Yeah, because I was going to say accountants have like the least unemployment rate, I think, of like any profession.
Yeah, it's pretty like they have a good system.
But I think that's the thing, is like picking a major in which it literally guarantees you a job.
Yeah.
So that was very smart on your part, for sure.
Yeah, a lot of things I did that was smart that had nothing to do with my heart, which is we were getting to different things. But I think that for me, coming to the realization that I chose this major out of fear of being homeless or just without some sort of financial security. My folks, I'm from a low-income family in Rocky Mountain, so didn't want to repeat some of the same mistakes that they had done in their life. And so while I do appreciate those lessons, I kind of wanted to sing a different tune. And so there was like that literal fear, like, I'm going to fail if I don't do this one degree. And so I've had a bit of a mental breakdown around junior year because I was just like, I don't like this at all. Like, I can do it. The work itself is not too hard. It's just a matter of, do I want to come to work every day and do this work? Nah.
Yeah. So with your fear, and you said you were fearful of being homeless, was that a real fear at the time, or?
I've told people that, and people consider it to be an irrational fear given how hard I work.
No, but yeah, it's like if you've had past experiences or you've known people.
No, I've never had we've never been homeless. Like, we've been without for a little bit, but we've never been on the street, that type of homeless. But
were you doubled up? Were you sharing homes with other family or?
For a small period in my grandma's apartment, that was a thing, but it didn't last for too long. And we have been evicted before, but I didn't even know that was what happening.
Right.
But yeah, that was.
But I think that's sometimes is where people who don't have the same experiences, and so when you say something like that, and they think you are being irrational, but maybe it's not.
Yeah.
Obviously, your probable chances of you actually being in that same situation are, greatly decreased. But if you've seen it happen before, if you've experienced it before, it's not as irrational.
Yeah.
Because sometimes I think people dismiss that. It's like, oh, you're just being crazy.
Yeah, it's I've had people tell that. Someone told me that, my teacher actually told me that in high school. I was just like, I just have this fear of not making or being homeless. He was just like, that's a bit of an irrational fear because you work too hard for that. But it was just also, I have this thing where I'm not too arrogant to think that everything's going to work out and it's going to be fine. There are people who have been at the top and ended up at the bottom. And that can happen overnight.
Yeah.
So I don't, consider it to be an irrational fear. It's something that can definitely happen to anyone. It's just a matter of how do you sort of move forward through that sort of struggle process.
Yeah, and working hard doesn't prevent it from happening.
Right.
Where they sound like, oh, you work. There's a lot of people who work.
Right. There are a lot of people with degrees that are homeless, so it's not an unprecedented thing.
But because anyways, I just wanted to, because I'm sure some students who have fears that they would never vocalize because of what they fear, another of how somebody would respond to that. But I think that's the piece is if it's a real fear to you, then
it's valid.
Especially, talk about it. Especially with Trio, it's that's what we're here for. And it's important that you, address it. So how did you address your fears?
I don't know if I've done that. I kind of just try to take it day by day and sort of face it head on and try to, if nothing else, try to make it authentic to who I am. And that never really feels like a fearful situation. Just feels like I'm just living my life every day.
Right.
So that's sort of a different approach I'm taking rather than feel like I have this obligation to do this thing to these people.
Right.
And that's way too much stress on me.
Right. Yeah, no, it's when you're, when it's not just you, it's a family or a community, then.
Yeah.
And you're doing what they want. It doesn't always work out well.
Yeah, especially when it comes from, because it's not I have a father for a doctor as a father, and he's like, you have to be a doctor because this is the family. It's not he's, my family's shoving this down my throat, but it comes from a place of love and wanting to make sure that I'm okay. But there are also more than one way to be okay, and I don't think that we as a family has sort of moved through what it means to be okay in different ways.
Right.
So it's a difficult I mean, my mom is understanding of it. My dad was like, I just got dropped off like the other day, but my dad, he was just like, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. And I'm just like, thanks, Dad.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's like some support in some regard, but also this, still underlying fear that what I'm embarking on might not be the type of money that is stable enough for them to be okay with what I'm doing.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, I mean, because that's the thing is like, if we'll go into your into public health that you're getting your graduate degree in, that is kind of like a new thing. Like nobody really knows. Like accounting, everybody knows it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and having your family say like, I think you're doing the wrong thing.
Yeah.
It's deep.
Yeah, and I mean, like I said, my mom is kind of like, oh, I kind of want to know more about this. Like, what are you doing? So, it's kind of like, yay. And then my dad is like also a little bit supportive, but also like, fam, like, how are we going to pay for this? Or not even like, how are we going to pay for this? Like, what is this going to look like once you graduate? Which is always sort of that parental, I guess. They just want to know, like, if is what you're doing in school going to pay off in the end once you get out of it.
Right.
So.
Yeah, and some of that's just, like, they want you to be successful. They don't want you to have to worry. Mm-hmm. And so it's like, oh, she's going to go into accounting. She's not going to have to worry again. Like, she'll always have a job, and she'll always, and so then it's, something new. And it's like, what? Oh, no. Because that was their plan, too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so junior year, what happened? You had a breakdown, you said?
Yeah, I had a bit of a mental breakdown.
In what kind of way? Like I don't know what I'm doing here, or
I felt
like stress and.
Yeah, I felt stressed. I felt overwhelmed. I was taking a lot of core classes.
Like accounting core classes?
Yeah, and it wasn't so much that I was doing terrible in them. I was just like, I just felt disconnected to what I was doing. And it felt bad because I felt guilty that in my head I was like sort of going back on my word of what I wanted to do. And that was like a major internal conflict that I was having. I was like, oh, I'm about to disappoint all my family. They're never going to love me again. Or it wasn't that extreme, but, it was just a lot, all that burden on me was just a lot to handle at the time. And it's still, a lot to handle. It's just a matter of sort of how do I calm the folks down?
Yeah, well, and also it was like changing directions from accounting to like public health. That's a major change.
Yeah.
And so anybody that goes through that, whether you're 22 or 42, that is like any change is going to be stressful because that's what change is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so then you. So why, and then how did you switch? Like you had this breakdown. Mm-hmm. You couldn't see yourself working as an accountant. Mm-hmm. So then what did you do?
So around that time, right, because I've been working at the Women's Center since my sophomore year. That first year, I wasn't super connected to the work that we were doing because I actually got the job through you. I don't know if you remember that. Because Jennifer Castillo was still working there. Mm-hmm. She's no longer there because she left to pursue MSW. But I got my job, and it was just a job for me. I didn't really interact with the staff as much, and I just didn't know all of the feminist things that were happening.
Right.
Didn't really understand it, wasn't really connected to it, and so...
so I referred you to her?
You did.
Okay. So I just need to say...
Trio works.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I want to make that you acted upon advice.
Yes, because I was like, I am broke. I also had like 2 other jobs that semester too. Like that first semester of sophomore year, so it was just like I was just all about getting my paychecks. Moving into like junior year, I think I worked either over the summer, I can't remember, but moving into like the junior year, there was also like staff lineup changes, so some people left and some people were brought on board. Angela Gay, who's now the associate director, she came on as a graduate assistant at first because she's a doctoral student. She ended up getting like the full-time position, but around that time she sort of like saw me and was just like, so what we're not going to do is just sit behind this desk and not contribute in like more critical ways. And so her sort of taking me under her wing, and she's like an amazing mentor. a dear friend, a shady buddy. That's like our inside joke. Everyone knows I'm shady. It comes from love.
Okay.
But people like her who sort of saw something in me that I didn't really think really mattered in the grand scheme of things. And so she and a bunch of other people sort of helped develop me into, I guess, a bit of a critical scholar. And so that was happening around the time that I was having like the mental breakdown about my major, because I just felt around the time super limited within accounting, because it's very like 1-2, but there is no room for like critical thinking and all those things, and that's more so up my alley. I do that on a regular basis.
Yeah, and you had mentioned before too the comfort level within like your academic spaces, where you could, like, a part of your work was your actual identity. Like the work was personalized.
Yeah, definitely. Just like being in the classroom, I just felt like another body. And like, this is not to say that all Black students within like PCOM feel this way. There may be people who can't like resonate with that, but I have a friend who, you know, she got opportunities through the same professor that we had, to be like a TA and all those things. So it's, you know, I think for me, it wasn't happening for me. And then too, like, opportunities that I would get for like professional development or personal development, I wasn't getting that through PCOM. It's like they sort of, I also felt too like frustrated with the fact that I felt overlooked. Like, I would get all these interviews, but then like nothing would come of those, and so it just felt like I was wasting my time.
Right.
But I was getting opportunities through Trio and like through the Women's Center. So it's kind of like I should go to where I'm wanted and not necessarily like force my way into something that doesn't really fit me and who I am.
Yeah, and I think that's the piece that's kind of a weird situation. So we've had students who didn't get like their full-time accounting internships at, you know, like the big-time firms until after they graduated.
Yeah.
And then they've been successful. But then the other piece too is do you want to do something where you're valued? And so, yeah, being overlooked or feeling invisible, or if you actually feel that, rather than just going like, oh, I guess I'll have to try again tomorrow.
Yeah, and I think too is like how,
because you're not a person that
you
gives up, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's like, so
I tried so hard.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean, I think that's the thing, is like it hit you deep of not like that feeling. It wasn't just like, oh, I couldn't get an internship, so therefore I've got to do something different.
Yeah, and too, like, I couldn't afford to not really have anything to do, right? Because I'm from Rocky Mountain, low-income family, so like I have to make things happen, or else like I'm just not going to be seen. And so that too was like an added layer. Is like, then I'm gonna have to go home, and there's nothing really there for me at home. So it's just like, well, what do you do? And all of those things was just, it was so stressful.
Yeah. And then what did you? So when Angela saw something more in you to get you more involved in the Women's Center, what did she see in you?
Someone who is a critical thinker, who is sort of open-minded enough to consider things from multiple perspectives, and also to like integrate my personal experiences into how I understand the world around me, and you know, sort of develop from there, I guess. I wish. I mean, she probably has like a whole letter about what she sees in me, but it's way more detailed than what I gave.
Yeah. So then what did you end up doing at the Women's Center when she brought you from behind the desk?
Oh, yeah, I became more involved with like brainstorming different events. Definitely, like, of course, logistical things, so like setting up or breaking down. But I became part of like the people who were sort of cultivating the second Women of Color retreat. I did like a few Feminist Fridays presentations. I started participating more in Feminist Fridays.
Can you let us know what Feminist Fridays are?
Yeah, so Feminist Fridays are a reoccurring thing that we do at the Women's Center every Friday. Sometimes the time changes based on how we're trying to get more people in. We've been kind of struggling with that lately. But basically it's about an hour, and you don't have to identify as a feminist to to participate. I want to stress that. Where people just sort of come in with like a topic or an issue, and then we combine that with some sort of theoretical framework through which we can talk about it, and then we just have like this sort of facilitated discussion around that topic.
And what was, I think one of your first ones was about athletes.
Race, gender, and sports, the commodification, the appropriation of Black bodies.
Yes.
Delicious.
So what did you, so what was your favorite topic that you facilitated, or you think people really resonated with them of all your Feminist Fridays that you facilitated?
I would say my favorite was the last one I did, which was Horrible Scholars, Sex Positivity for Black Women. That was my favorite one because it was directly related to the research that I had done the summer before, which we'll probably talk about later. Yeah. But that was my favorite because, you know, I was like working on this and like I pulled things from my paper, and so it felt like, yeah, I get to talk about my stuff, even though I don't like to talk about myself often. But I got to a chance to talk about something that I have been working on. But I think one of the Feminist Fridays that I did that resonated with a lot of people was the second one that I did. And it was around like the ride or die chick trope and how that sort of trope normalizes the abuse of Black women. The concept of a ride or die chick typically is presented in like mainstream media or like hip hop culture and things of that nature. It's typically a Black or a Latino woman who they're in a relationship with a Black man, and it's usually some sort of drugs involved. He's like usually a drug dealer or like maybe a rapper or something like that. And whatever he asks her to do, she sort of does it. She is like his backbone. If he's like cheating with a lot of women, like she's still gonna stay and all those things. So a lot of sort of toxic things that you might see in a relationship becomes sort of amplified within this type of expectations of Black women, Black and brown women.
So it's more than a power dynamic, like it's more than codependency, or
that's definitely a part of it. Sort of just like it's a lot of things. If I were to do it again, it would definitely be like unpacked from like a different perspective in terms of like masculinity and like the expectations of that and how that sort of coincides with the expectations of a ride or die chick. But I only like just focused on like how that normalizes abuse on Black women. I kind of wanted to center that, but it's a lot.
Yeah. No. And what part of the discussion really resonated with people? Was it?
It started off with talking about Black women, but I also think that people were sort of connecting it to the women in their lives, who either were or weren't Black women. And I think that, for me, it was sort of like, it's sort of the same thing, but it just has a different name in different communities and different cultures. And two, like that presentation itself, like had a lot of people that came, that didn't just work in the center, but also like maybe came from the other center, other centers or what have you. And so it was like a bit of a packed house. So that was like, wow, people are coming to my things.
Yeah. No, it feels good when people are interested in the same topics you are.
Yeah. Oh, sure. And I can't forget this one. I recently did one. I did it with a friend of mine. We kind of like co-facilitated. We did one on is it a disadvantage? So we were talking about trans folks in sports, and how that's like still a major controversy within contemporary sports.
Right, and what were the discussions about that?
We were just talking. So we kind of like brought it home about the bylaws and policies within state's campus for like intramural sports, club sports, and like the NCAA, like the varsity sport, varsity athletic level.
Right.
Because I have a few teammates. I also play rugby. A few teammates that identify as non-binary. And so I didn't even know there were bylaws. Not saying that they shouldn't be on the team.
Right.
But I didn't even know there was like bylaws that sort of made it more inclusive for non-binary folks. So I'm just like, wow, that's just a thing. And then too, you have like people such as Fallon Fox, who is like a retired MMA fighter, who is a transgender woman. And so she was signed male at birth, and then she transitioned when she was like in her 20s or something, and underwent like 6 years of hormone therapy or something like that, had like the reassignment surgery and all those things. And so she fought. Like, she was an MMA fighter. And then there was, like, some fights where people just felt like she had more of an advantage. So it got into, like, are there super...
Like physical advantage.
Yeah. And it's like, are there, like, super large, you know, strength differences between male and female bodies? And then it's like, how is that complicated for folks that are, like, intersex? And it's just a whole lot of things. Like, we could not cover all the things we wanted to cover within that 1 hour. But...
Yeah. I mean, it's another whole world that is opening up. I mean, when you see the world is very binary, like you're either one, it's like if you're female, it means you're not male.
Yeah.
You know, and that we want things to not be complicated. But people are complicated.
Yes.
And people are, you know, and so as much as you try to make it not complicated, you know, and it's just like, nice try, but...
You fit in this box.
Yeah. You know, it's like, no, we have to be responsive to the diverse people and their experiences, et cetera.
Yeah.
So now you said that one of your talks had to do with your research.
Yes.
So would you like to go into your research?
Yes. So the topic or the title of my research paper was Jezebel the Virgin. So it was a critique of the Sex Positive Feminist Movement, and I sort of wrote it within the context of what this means for higher education. And it basically unpacked like the different layers of what it sort of means to be at that time a Black woman that is a virgin. We're not going to talk about that because that's TMI, but but at that time I was sort of trying to come up with the project because I just got into the McNair program. I just applied and all those things, and so that was like my summer research thing. And so I was trying to like figure out what I wanted to talk about. Like before I even started the project, there was a Feminist Friday by Abi. I can't remember how to pronounce his last name, but he just he's graduating this semester and from the sociology department. I think he'll be like a PhD, something like that. But he did one. It was called Critical Thoughts on Sex Positivity, and it was basically like the whole presentation was critiquing like the sex positive movement and how like the mainstream movement is very inclusive of white cisgender heterosexual women and doesn't really consider the experiences of marginalized folks, so Black women, fat people, disabled folks, all those things.
Yeah, and it usually is middle class, upper middle class.
Yep.
It's people with privileges. Because sometimes I look at it, it's like people with the time.
Yeah.
And the resources.
Yes.
You know, to have movements. You know, because if you're working 3 jobs, it's hard to lead a movement. But,
exactly.
yeah. So it's like that movement thing is like, comes out of privilege. So what did he say that inspired you?
Yeah, I mean, just like the whole presentation itself was just amazing, and I never really thought about it in that sort of context. I had heard of like the term sex positivity, but I didn't really know what it meant. And so like him sort of giving them rundown and also saying, let's complicate this and see the gaps, was also sort of, it sparked something in me. And I sort of wanted to sign up and do it. The original project that I had, it wasn't, I can't remember what it was about, but it was about like how people who are sexually active like shape what that means and how they sort of push that out for folks who aren't sexually active, and it was kind of weird at the time. I definitely would have reworked it, but it ended up getting reworked to what it is now, and sort of looked at what does it mean to be a Black woman at a virgin, and what are the sort of the controlling imagery around that. And so I definitely had to talk about the Jezebel archetype and caricature that still remains to be
and what's the history of Jezebel? The significance of that?
Yeah, the Jezebel. So it started as an archetype and it became a caricature through like mass media, cartoons and things of that nature. But it's basically and it came about through slavery, and it sort of led to the justification for the rape against Black women, because they sort of view the African women that were enslaved as like their deviance was related to their sexual promiscuity. So the Jezebel is essentially like a hypersexualized Black woman. And so that's like a major controlling trope on how Black women are able to show up authentically within their sexual expression.
Right. Now, who did you have as mentors for your research? Because most people,
Angela.
okay, yeah, I use air quotes. Most people, they'll do their research within like their major, and then they'll have a faculty member, that they've had before in a class to be their advisor, like their research advisor. So since you weren't doing research within management, how did you find a mentor?
I worked with her. And also too, like she was looking for someone to do research around something related, sort of, but not really. But she's a doc student, so she sort of was able to get approved as a mentor. So, the work that we do at the center sort of aligned up with what I was sort of thinking about for a research project. And so it just sort of happened through me just, working.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, I think that's important for other students to know is that to get involved in research, it doesn't have to be with a faculty member. If you know a doctoral student who's doing, cool things or interested in similar, topics, it's like you can go work with them.
Yeah.
You can seek them out.
Yeah,
Say,
definitely.
tell me more about your research.
Yeah. It definitely helps if like the people that you like are your professors and what have you. But it wasn't going to happen for me in that way. And so I sort of looked to different people and different avenues to sort of make that happen for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think it's like come out of the box of academia. Mm-hmm. You have all these resources of staff members. Mm-hmm. So, don't overlook a staff person. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So then you did all of this through McNair. Yes. So do you want to talk a little bit about McNair?
Yeah. So McNair has...
So it's one of the TRIO programs.
Yes. Robert E. McNair, was it post-baccalaureate program? Mm-hmm. It's all the words. Is named after Robert E. McNair, who was one of the astronauts who died in the Challenger. Apparently was an amazing man, like played the saxophone in space. There's a cool picture if you look it up. He's literally in space with the saxophone. But it's specifically designed for sort of underrepresented folks that are students to sort of achieve up to like the PhD level of education within like a 10-year gap from after they graduate from their undergrad institution. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I mean the piece of like the data attached to that. So if low income first generation students only 10% of those who start a bachelor's degree graduate within 4 years. So now we take that small fraction of a group of students and now let's put them into PhD programs.
Right.
So then how many of those, then go on to even apply for a PhD program,
get funding for it.
Yeah, start it. And then PhDs are really hard to get. I mean, sometimes it takes people up to 8 years, to finally get their PhD, their dissertation published. So that's, it becomes a much sadder story. Or, I mean, we could say elite, but it's not. Yeah. It's not elite. It's
definitely sad. Like a filtration process. The way that it's sort of like structured.
And it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah.
So how is McNair helping you or supporting you to eventually earn your PhD?
They definitely sort of like are additional cheerleaders that I have. Shout out to Trisha. She was like the McNair coordinator before she moved into like I think research or something like that, like coordinator for that. But no, she was like my McNair coordinator. And she was like specifically for like the seniors that were like about to graduate, because I'm technically a part of like the first cohort that will graduate. So that's some pressure.
Well, it's exciting.
Yeah, terrified. But I sort of, once like all the research that I did, like the literature review that I did was sort of over, and now I'm just like, oh my God, like what do I do next? And I was very stressed about it because now it's just like graduate school, and like at that point, like the only amount of graduate school I ever thought about was like going to school for accounting
Mm-hmm.
and getting my master's in
Yeah.
accounting for
Mhm.
a year. 2 years it was part-time.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, this is still not what I want to do. And I definitely want to do more work that I've been doing at the Women's Center. Like, is there a way to merge the two? Like, I don't even know. I'm so confused. So she kind of threw out like public policy. Let's do that. That sounds cool.
Mhm.
I'm like, bet.
Yeah.
And
And it's related to accounting management.
yeah, it has like there's like different like definite economics that's like part of it too, and sort of like you have to consider that when you're talking about like policy making and all those things. It's definitely a important component. And then I was looking at different public policy programs, and I found one that also combined like women gender studies or sexuality studies at George Washington. And I didn't have the opportunity to sort of have a women gender studies minor, let alone a major here. So I was just like, oh, this is a good program, and it's kind of rare. Like that pairing together is kind of rare. So I definitely made sure that was like my top choice. And I also applied for all the other schools. So.
Yeah. And so is this a master's program?
Yes.
Or a PhD? Okay.
Yeah, so I'll get like a master's of arts in like public policy with a concentration in women gender sexuality studies. I got in and they gave me money.
Yeah. Well, you were accepted to multiple places and given
Yes.
money at other multiple places.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's list out what schools you were accepted to and how much money you were offered.
Yeah, so I got into Duke, Georgetown, George Washington, American University, University of Maryland at College Park, and William and Mary. I didn't get into William and Mary because they sort of suspended their admission because of different structural things. They were trying to rework, they were trying to figure a lot of things out.
Yeah.
There were like low enrollment rates and all those things. So I probably would have got in, but I don't know. They just refunded.
Yeah.
the application feedback. Duke didn't give me a lot of money. Duke is also private school, so LOL to that. And I got a decent amount of money from Georgetown and American, but George Washington and University of Maryland too. They also offered me like a GA position, a graduate assistantship position. But George Washington was my top choice, and they also gave me the most money. I was able to get my first year is sort of paid off, and then my second year up to $20,000 is paid off. So I'm gonna have to finesse the last 12,000 because it's very expensive at George Washington. But the first year I don't have that sort of financial stress in terms of tuition.
Yeah, and I think that's too. It's the time to apply for other GA positions or other scholarships or funding opportunities.
Definitely.
Yeah. And so I think that's sometimes people think, oh, I can't afford graduate school.
Oh, it's expensive.
But it doesn't mean it's off the table.
Right.
So
yeah, a lot of people, I've heard people say that they had to finance it through loans, which is an option. I try my best to avoid that because I already have so many loans as is. So it was definitely like a blessing to be able to have all this because like typically you don't really get that type of funding for a master's level degree. The government act like they don't have enough money. So
yeah,
it's definitely difficult, and to be able to have that amount of money up front was just amazing.
Yeah, and it shows their investment in you. Like they're going to want you to succeed.
Yeah, and also I will say that there was one of the fellowships that I got. They gave me a tuition remission, and then I also have like a McNair fellowship through George Washington. So in terms of McNair, like it's so recognized that people sort of, it's kind of like being, I don't want to say a celebrity, but that's like a definite marker on your resume or on your signature block in your email to say that you're a McNair scholar. Like it carries a lot of weight.
It's known in academia.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's something. It's like if you're accepted into that program, that it means you're at a certain level, whether it be commitment, intellectual capabilities, etc.
Yeah, VIP treatment if you have McNair.
And then even with McNair too, we provide you with assistance with the applications, the GRE, the writing tutorials. So it's like if you've never written a literature review, no worries.
Yep.
They'll help you.
Yeah.
So, and you mentioned never being out of the country before, and so that was why military was appealing to you.
Yes.
But now you've been out of country?
I have. I went on a ASB, which is alternative service break trip to Guatemala for gender issues. It was fun.
Yes. What did you do there?
So many things. We flew out there. We were able to sort of mingle with, I don't want to say mingle with the locals. That sounds elitist, but definitely learn about different things. We learned a lot about the history of Guatemala, and they had like a whole 36-year civil war, and that ended in 96, so it's not even that old.
Right.
And so there is major trauma within the country regarding that, and there's so much violence against women. We didn't even talk about like the violence against like LGBTQ plus folks. I wanted to ask those questions, but I didn't know if it was sort of getting off track. But being trans is a gender identity, so I probably should have asked about that. But there are a lot of different things. But we also learned about powerful women within Guatemala that are also sort of trailblazers and that are trying to make a difference within Guatemala. So that was a really good thing to see. So it was just an amazing time. The people that I went with were absolutely fabulous people. And all of our reflections, they weren't like, oh, I thought this was nice. Like we were all like very critical and intentional with how we were reflecting, and any sort of not debate or maybe like any disagreements or dissenting opinions. It wasn't like aggressive or anything like super you're wrong or anything like that. It was like, okay, I see where you're coming from, but here's where I'm coming from, and sort of seeing that mutual understanding.
Right. And so how are women in Guatemala, because you use the term like trailblazing, different than the women in the United States? Like those movements or...
Well, I think that the movements in Guatemala are sort of inherently intersectional. Intersectional being that we all have a lot of identities, and we all show up in multiple ways within those identities, and they intersect with systems in different ways, and that impacts our experiences with how we sort of live our lives with each other and all those things. And so within Guatemala, because a lot of these women where the violence is happening, we didn't even talk about like the East Coast, which is where like a lot of Afro-diasporic folks live. We didn't even touch that, which is probably like some sort of anti-blackness thing going on there.
Right. There's another layer.
So many layers. But we just sort of focused on like the poor and indigenous population. Like the indigenous folks make up like majority of the population there, but they're also like the disenfranchised population there, which is different if you're talking about like the United States in terms of black people, because black people are like 13% of the population, and white people are the majority technically, but it's flipped, but it's still like oppression there. And so a lot of the work that is done is focused on poor indigenous women, which are like three identities that are definitely dehumanized on a lot of different levels, and it's also too, when you consider Guatemala is a quote unquote developing or underdeveloped country. I don't really know how they're sort of labeled, where they're just trying to survive, and so there's a lot of but emphasis on like literacy and sort of making sure that people are having practices that are sustainable, because they also have like environmental issues, whereas the United States, it's sort of we have this facade that we have it together, until you ask certain people, and then you get a completely different story. And also too, like with a lot of women in these movements are college educated, which is also like a bit of a privileged identity to be able to say, I went to this university, I learned these things, now I'm woke.
Well, and access to information.
Yeah.
I mean, that is a huge privilege.
Yeah.
So, I mean, at NC State, you have access to like an unlimited amount, of information, where the people who don't, say indigenous groups or what have you, like there's no way.
Yeah.
Like, you can be on the same plane.
Yeah.
And it's like that, using your privilege of even just access to information to share that information.
Yeah. And then too, like, you know, you see that in like, it's a lot of scholarship around like gender issues, but you see more so like within like Latin America in general. And yeah, that's part of Latin America. They speak Spanish. And also different indigenous languages and all those things. But you see a lot more like grassroots movements, because it's sort of, I see grassroots movements as more, they're like more community based, like they're about the people like on the ground. And then you sort of see a flip with US or more developed countries, quote unquote, where they're able to use these big words in all these dissertations, which is not a bad thing. But then even those dissertations are very inaccessible to the public who aren't able to comprehend that at the level that you're able to.
Right. Well, even the language.
Yeah.
The words.
Definitely.
Yeah. The writing structure.
So many. What is a pedagogy? I still need to look that up.
Yeah. And so one of the things that you did want to cover is like the theme of risk taking as a
Yes.
low-income first-generation college student. Because when we started, it's like you don't have space to take risks.
At all.
Like, yeah.
What is space?
Yeah, and a risk is like when you have like no support network, you know, so if something fails, then you're falling.
Yeah, it's all on
hard.
you.
So, yeah, why don't you talk to us about, how you took your first risk, like how you actually ended up doing that and how it worked out, and even if you took some risks and it didn't work out well.
I mean, definitely like having that mental breakdown was like a risk. It was just like, how dare I sort of go back on the original plan. Taking risks when you're like in this position is difficult, because you have a lot riding on you, and you have sort of unspoken obligations that you sort of have to meet to the people in your life. And it's not so much to say that they don't care about you, that they don't want you to succeed, but success is sort of viewed with a very limited understanding, and that makes for a lot of stress and to feel overwhelmed and frustrated and all those things.
I mean, so how did you educate your parents?
I didn't say nothing.
Okay.
I didn't say anything until I got into grad school. I'm one of those people, I don't like to talk about things unless they've like actually happened. So I can say like, hey, it depends on who I'm talking to. I might tell my friends that I applied for this thing and I didn't get it. But I won't tell my parents or like, you know, my mentors and things of that nature that I applied for something until I got it. So
why is that? Khalia?
I guess it's probably like a worry thing. I don't want to worry my parents with like, if I got like 10 rejection letters and like 1 acceptance, I don't want to worry my parents with the 10 because I got into that one.
Right.
Whereas I can tell
one is all you needed.
Right. And I can just tell my friends about all of the 11. And it's lower stakes. Like they don't have that expectation. They're just like, I just want you to be happy, boo. And that's sort of what I need. And at that time, especially if I got like 10 in a row.
Right. Yeah, there's not as much of an emotional, like connection. Because if you fail at something, for a family, you know, it's depending upon you. It's totally different than a friend who's like, yeah, I failed 8 times.
Yeah.
You know, yeah.
It's interesting. Not saying once again that my parents don't love me.
No.
But it's just a different. It's just a different thing, and like just having like a support system, like at the Women's Center, and like just different, especially like women of color. Like the women of color in my life have been amazing for me, and so just having like that support system in different areas has made it so that if I do feel like I feel fine. Even though I still stress about it because that's just my Virgo energy. I like to stress about things that I can't control. But just having that support system in different areas has made it that much easier.
Now, did you not take a risk that in hindsight you wish you had?
Wow. That's a heavy question. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I guess, and I don't know, because I don't really believe in like regrets anymore, because I've learned things the way that I needed to learn them, even though it's kind of like, wow, I could have did this, but
Yeah,
you know,
that's fine,
I've
yeah.
also wouldn't have learned certain things if I hadn't made these decisions.
Right.
So at this point, no,
Good.
but
Yeah.
I sort of am making peace with the decisions that I make because I'm sort of learning from those losses in order to like make that or turn that into like more victories for me.
Right.
So yeah.
Right. Back to, didn't you win other awards? What did you do at the 3-minute thesis competition? So what other awards have you won? 'Cause
Yeah.
I think you've not told us all about them.
I'm very good at embracing my victories. So I went to, I will say that at first I did not even at first, I didn't want to participate because I just felt like
You didn't want to participate in what?
it was a 3-minute thesis competition at the it was like a McNair conference at UNCG. So McNair programs from state, UNC couldn't be there, but at UNCG their program, Fayetteville State I think, but you know, a couple different McNair programs from different schools came together, and we watched a panel discussion, and all these things. They were talking about like grad schools and like getting the PhD, how stressful it is. Some of the people that were talking to us are in like that doctoral stage, and so they're like experiencing these things firsthand. And then close to the end of the program, there was space for a 3-minute thesis competition. Like I said, I did not want to participate in this. I was sort of politely pushed by Trisha Jackson and Dr. Chapman to do this.
So what was it? What did you have to do?
I basically had to give like a 3 minutes or less spiel on the research that I had been doing, which was the Jezebel, the virgin research paper that I did. And so I had to, write something up, send it to Dr. Chapman. She looked over it. She gave me comments. I redid that, gave me more feedback. And so then I had something to read off when I did my presentation, and then I ended up getting first place, and I won a printer.
Yay! That's real.
Yes.
That is real.
It is in my apartment right now as we speak.
Yeah. And why did you win? Like, what were the rubric? What did they look for? What was valued in that?
So, and we also had to we didn't have to have a slide. It was highly recommended to have a slide, but all the things that I put on my slide, I kind of like touched on it. I just kind of spoke clearly. I think I spoke a little too fast because that's what I do when I'm nervous. But I sort of laid out all the things, made it so that people wanted to learn more. There were a lot of head nods and like, yes, girl, while I was speaking. And it was kind of like throwing me off because I wasn't prepared. But I can't remember all the rubrics, but it wasn't like a harsh grading system. It was kind of like a yes or no. Did they do this? Did they not? And so I got, points for stuff.
Yeah. Good. Now,
and Indira got second place.
Yes. NC State swept.
Yes.
So to be your parent, so what are you going to do after your graduate degree? What kind of job can you get with the master's in public policy?
I imagine I could do I think I'm going to take a break between getting my master's and PhD because PhD is a lot. And I'm also tired. And I've been in school for a long time. And I kind of want to like take a break and work for a little bit before I sort of commit myself to that process because it's a commitment, not just a degree.
Yeah, it's a lifestyle.
Yeah. I think I see myself doing like some sort of advocacy work around like comprehensive sex education, sort of mandating that at the K through 12 level, and also like just revamping the curriculum in general. Is very like STI based and use condoms, which is important, but there's also no conversation around like how systems impact sexuality. And I think that a lot of people think that sexuality is one of those things that's completely removed from oppression in like systems, and that's not the case at all. And also too, like just having an understanding of gender identities and like sexual orientation. Like people don't talk about that. Like in the South, like North Carolina is not I can't remember, but they don't really talk about like sexual orientation.
So that's not part of the curriculum in a lot of the sex ed programs in schools.
Right. Like some states, like it's not required for the information to be medically accurate. which is a problem. Some states, there's no regulation around like promoting religion. Some states, they put like a negative spin on like being within the LGBTQ plus community, so it's very heteronormative and all those things. I think North Carolina, they only want to focus on sex within the context of a heterosexual marriage, which is also problematic. So it's the curriculum itself, while it's important to have comprehensive sex education, the way that it's done is also terrible.
Oh, the method of it?
Yes.
Like how it puts it out?
Not even just the method, but just what's taught.
Yeah. Well, because I think part of it's like the message and the messenger. So, yeah, because it's the only place, because where else do people get their sex education? It's
the gym teacher.
Yeah, but I think that's like that's the only structured, and then the other is like self-taught or media or friends.
Yeah, internet, people who don't know what they're talking about and that's just public schools. So you can't really regulate private schools because they're private. Like they're kind of free from that sort of chokehold.
Right, and so why should there be sex education like you want? Like, why is there a need? Have they found that the current curriculum has issues? Is it leading to, like, what's the result of it?
Of just having comprehensive sex education in general? Well, for one thing, states that have abstinence-only based education, sex education versus comprehensive states have lower rates in comparison of teenage pregnancy and like STI rates. They're like lower rates in comprehensive states versus abstinence only states. So that's one thing. But I think that too it's not pleasure centered, so there's no real talk about masturbation. If it is, it's only talked about for the guys in the room, which is like unfortunate. And two, when you talk about pleasure, that also interacts with or disrupts capitalism, because capitalism, it wants us to sort of work until we die and then have kids so they can work till they die, and so you don't really have time for yourself. And so like the concept of self-care in that way is sort of you're getting in the way of work. And so you're sort of disrupting that system too. And people just don't know about their bodies, like, and people are sort of shamed to like have different experiences with their bodies. And so while sex education has some benefits, it has a lot of detriment to how it's taught and how it's framed and what teachers understand about sex and sexuality. And it becomes like people don't really know about their bodies until they're like in their 40s and 50s, when we could have been figuring these things out when we're like 10 years old.
Yeah, and how does this relate to the Me Too movement, where now there's all of these, women coming forward saying, yeah, I did not have control over my body.
Yeah.
Or things were done and said to me about my body that now with this movement, I can now share that I never shared before.
Yeah, I think part of, and I guess it should be called like a different type of name instead of like comprehensive sex education, because these things shouldn't be sort of isolated to just sexuality and sex. The concept of consent in general is just, if you want another word from it, it's just permission. We ask permission for things every day. And so that's one of those muscle memory things that children should know, and that becomes built. It's kind of like math. Like, a lot of people don't really know about consent until they're in college, but a lot of people don't go to college.
Right.
And so it's kind of like teaching algebra to someone who hasn't learned how to add yet. And so that muscle memory hasn't been built to the point where they could work up to algebra. And it's the same thing for consent. And so
consent is still that's what's being talked about, is because people don't know what consent is.
Yeah, and it's a lot of gray area within that too that people don't like to talk about. And so while there is like yes and enthusiasticness, yes and no, and is this person like shying away? Like, what is their nonverbal cues? A lot of that sort of gets binarized too, and there's so much that happens within the gray area that people don't like to talk about and work through, which I think also is a part of like pleasure-centered sex education. Is like, how do you navigate this sort of gray area? Because a lot of things happens in the gray area. Like we just said, like people were complex. And so to like put this sort of binarized understanding on people, it just messes everything up.
Yeah, and I mean, even going back to how you said, like, the systems impact is, you know, a person of privilege or power interacting with a person without that much privilege or power, you know, and that dynamic of just our systems approach.
Yeah, especially when you're talking about sexual assault and like specifically Black women. Like Black women don't really get believed when we talk about, or not me, it's not my experience, but when Black women come out about some sort of sexual abuse or sexual assault, like they're not believed. And especially when you're talking about like a Black man who we just like, we don't want to put another Black man in jail or all these things. And so those things get really complicated. And then you get into like, how do we hold people accountable? What does accountability looks like? Transformative justice, I don't know. Like it gets really tricky.
Yeah, and you're going to figure that out in 2 years at George Washington University.
Of course. I try to, my hope is that my way of doing things is more preventative rather than reactionary. I don't like try to do damage control. It doesn't really control it. Like the damage is done, and how do we heal from that is sort of the next question. But I'd rather sort of keep 1,000 kids from sexually assaulting other people than, you know, having to rehabilitate 1,000 folks who have sexually assaulted folks.
Right. No, for sure. Now, what's your last piece of advice before we end here?
Last piece of
to
advice.
TRIO students, current, past, present, future?
Make sure you have a bomb support system. That's really important. And your spaces can look like anything. Like I'm a Black woman, and I don't personally, for me, one of the spaces I don't go to is just the African American Cultural Center, and that's because of comfort level. Like I've built relationships with people at the Women's Center, so that's my space. So I always try to find your space, and that could look like a variety of different things, but make sure that people in your space are always sort of rooting for you and will hold you accountable, will tell you the truth, and will always make space for your authenticity. So
yeah, it's like find your home,
yes.
not the home people tell you should be your home.
Yeah, definitely find your emotional home.
yeah. Your pack, your whatnot. Well, thank you so much, Khalia. We are excited to hear about what George Washington has in store for you. So we'll have you come back in a year or so.
Okay, I can do that.
Okay.
Hopefully I have enough money to travel back.
Yeah, I'll stop that. You will.
TRIO Student Support Services Program and Student Support Services STEM are federally funded college retention and completion programs. These programs focus on academic, personal, and career support for under-resourced undergraduate students. At TRIO SSS and SSS STEM, our goal is helping our students reach their goals. We are currently accepting new students to our program. Apply today. Go to www.ncsu.edu to learn more about student support services at NC State.